Makeup Hedgehog here. As you can see, we are doing a palette declutter. This is like the first more longer form video that I'm filming, which is going to be very interesting to say at least. And you're also going to now hear my voice, which I know that a lot of you haven't been able to hear before because I mostly do reels. And this is going to be a bit awkward in the beginning, but as I was editing the clips, I think it gets better in the end. So thanks for the patience and hope you enjoy the declutter video. And I think the usual disclaimer that I have, that all the other creators have from declutters, is that this is no way meant to be a way to gloat with my collections or to try to say that everyone should have this big of a collection of makeup. Makeup has always been a hobby of mine, and most of the palettes, aside from the few ones that I mentioned in the video, I have bought with my own money. Or the ones that I haven't have been gifts from friends, so I haven't been given these by the brands, and no brand is paying me to promote any of these palettes. So all the opinions in the video are my own, and if you don't like declutters, then don't watch this video, go watch something else. But if you enjoy this video and maybe want to see other long-form content with some audio from me in the future, then certainly like, subscribe, comments, do all the YouTube stuff. And without further ado, let's get to the main event, which is the actual declutter. Thank you! So, let's begin. As you can see, there's quite a lot of, there's a mix of drugstore, there's a mix of indie brands, and then there's a mix of higher end palettes. And I think we will start with the higher end ones because I'm most likely not going to get rid of too many of those. So first we're gonna go through my Natasha Denona palettes. I have quite a few, but I think there's definitely one that I am going to be decluttering. It's one I haven't been using in the last few, I think the whole year. So I think it's time to let it go. So first we have the retro. Sorry, it's the retro glam one. So this is one of the newer ones. It looks like this. Because it's one of the newer ones, and I actually do like the color story. This is very nice for the springtime, so definitely I am keeping this one. It's the retro. I think this is a classic for quite many. I know this has been a very popular palette from her, and this is also definitely a keep for me. I really like this color story. I think the mauves are very, very pretty, and also the silvers, and this is something, I think it's a favorite for me for the late autumn, when at the November time there's quite many events, so this is very good for that one. But you can also get some very nice office looks, so it's definitely a keep. So it's the pastel palette. I actually got mine this year. I know this was the spring palette, I think a year ago. And the palette looks like this. And this is definitely a companion palette for me. So I think you can see it so there's below in the stack, there's the Circo de Loco palette. So this is a palette that I use with that one. This is not something that I can create looks alone with, even though I do have a relatively fair skin tone. But yeah, so definitely it's a keep, but it's not a standalone palette in my collection. Palette. I think I got this on when it was on some sort of offer. It's a very warm toned palette. I think Natasha Denona has quite a few of these, but I believe this was like her ideal palette that she made. But yeah, I'm definitely keeping it. I do like the color story, but I do say that if you have quite a lot of her palettes, then there's quite a high risk that you have quite a lot of repetitive shades within your collection. But I still like it quite a lot, and I do get use out of it, so it's a keep. So this is the first declutter. So this is the bronze palette. It is also, I think, one of my older Natasha Denona palette. It looks like this. And yeah, I think this palette has had few issues for me. First of all, a lot of the shimmers look the same when you apply them to your eyelids. There is also, regarding the matte shades, they are very one-toned. So you don't get a lot of depth from this palette. There is only like this one, and even that's a shimmer, and then there's the really like dark black shade. But for me, I think what this palette lacks is the variety in terms of how much depth you can get out of it. So that's the reason why I'm getting rid of it, and also it is getting quite old at this point. The last one, this is what I'm keeping. Let's see if I can get it open. So this is the Circo de Loco palette. I know a lot of people, I don't think this was one of her more popular palettes, because I know the color story can be a bit challenging if you're not a fan of very colorful shades. Like I said, I used this with the pastel palette. I also do have sun trouble. I can get some looks with this on its own, but the pastel palette I think is a very good companion palette for this. But I definitely also say, because this is the only like bigger palette from her that I own, that I actually didn't pay full price for this. I got this at a good discount. So if you really like color, then yeah, maybe get it. But I'd say this is also a palette you can skip from her if you feel like it's not your color story. So this is the ABH Fall Romance. I have a reel with this, I think actually a couple of ones. And I actually really like this color story. I think it's actually very beautiful, and it is a bit dark, so if you're a fair skin tone like I am, then definitely I'd say that if you feel like you need to reach for some lighter mattes in other palettes to create looks, then you can do that. But I can use this as a standalone palette too. I just know that I will get a bit darker looks. The only thing that I would perhaps change in this palette is the fact that there are two greens, and the greens look very similar in the eyes, so those I think would be the only shades I would switch out. But other than that, I really like this palette, and I think this is the new ABH formula is definitely, it's very good. And the next, the very glittery one, is the Sultry palette. This is in her old format, and I do have to say that this is not as old as some might think. I actually got this when it was second time launched in the Christmas gift set, I think a year or two ago. And this is what it looked like. I think if you have probably seen this on YouTube and on social media a lot, but I'm not declaring this. This was actually a Christmas present from my husband, so it's not going anywhere. Next are my Pat McGrath palettes, and I'm already going to say that none of these are going to get decluttered. I like Pat McGrath. I definitely think that you should buy her palettes only on sale. They aren't that great. I would never pay full price for them. Let's first get the smaller ones out of the way. So this was the Christmas palette from her last year. I only bought from the last year's collection. I think this was actually the only product that I ordered. And this is what the shades look like. The formula in these palettes is actually very good. I would perhaps hope that she would actually have this formula also in her other palettes. It's very creamy, and also the matte quality, even though it has only one matte, was pretty good. So definitely a keep, and this is definitely a formula that I think she should be using more. Okay, so this is the new Christmas collection palette. I also have the bigger palette, you will see it soon. So this is the smaller one. I don't remember the name of this palette, but anyway, so this is the only small palette that I picked from this year's smaller palettes. This year they had quite a few, because last year they had 2. And this year I think they had 5 of these smaller ones. And definitely I'd say that if you like the formula of last year's small palettes, then you will like this. The only complaint I have from this is that the matte, that is the only matte shade in this, it's very, very patchy. So I think that is the really only downside of this. This more darker glittery shade that you can see here, I will be trying to see if you can use that as a matte, because it is quite... It's not as shimmery on the lid as the rest of the more shimmery shades here. So I will be seeing if this can be used as a matte shade, but just so you know, if you're planning to buy these, at least in this palette, the matte shade is a bit patchy compared to some of her other matte formulas. So we had a bit of a camera setup change, but anyway, let's continue. So this is the bigger holiday palette from this year, and this is the, I think, which was geared towards more lighter skin tones. And I'm gonna be the boring person and say that I like the blushes in this the most. The shadows are fine. I actually do like the matte quality of this one compared to the small palette. None of these are patchy, they blend really well. The shimmers are also beautiful, but they're nothing... How should I say? If you have tried these very shifty indie shadows, then compared to those, these are like very average. They are very nice and good quality shimmers, and you will get really nice looks out of this, but they aren't anything spectacular. So, like I said, it's a nice palette, and if you want it, then definitely get it, but just so you're aware, it's not the original Mothership quality, for example. And now we're getting to the good part of, okay, the Christmas palette from 2 years ago is actually in the bottom, but we'll get to that last. So, the Mothership, I believe this is a Divine Rose 2. You probably have seen this, but I can open it and show it how it looks like. So this is the one, and this is the one that's in the very reflective pink packaging. You can see my phone camera over there. And this is how it looks like. And let's see, other way around. Here we go. It's a very beautiful palette. How should I say? I love the color story of this more, but I actually use the Divine Rose 1 more, which is much more muted, but I think that's related to the fact that the Divine Rose 1 is something that you can get quite many office and this sort of glamour party looks with. This is a bit brighter, and even though I really do like bright and shifty shadows, I think when I gravitate towards more higher end makeup, I usually like to go for the more sophisticated looks. And here's the Divine Rose 1. Mine is in the black packaging. I do believe this came out with a limited edition sort of matte pink packaging at some point, but that is something that they only did for a limited amount of time, unlike with the Mothership 2, which I think is by default ships with the bright pink packaging. But this is the Mothership 1, Divine Rose. Oh, sorry, it's the Divine Rose 1. I don't remember the Mothership number of this. So here it is. And as you can see, it is much more muted, but like I said, if you really want a Mothership for those very cool-toned office looks, I think this is a very good palette, but you do also get some glam looks, particularly if you use this shade to top any of the other shades within this palette. And like I said, this is something that I actually get much more use out of compared to the Divine Rose 2. So this is the Utopian Dream. I got this actually this summer. I got it when she was running one of her sales. And this was more of one of those palettes I was thinking that if it goes on sale, I might grab it. And then it was on sale and I bought it. I bought this in the same time, I think, with the bronzers when she came out with those. And let's open her up. And here's the Utopian Rose, Utopian Dream inside. It's very warm toned. I think my camera is making the colors look a bit funny, but it's very warm toned. It has like one pop of purple, but otherwise it's very gold, rose and peachy. I think shades that Pat McGrath has at this point repeated quite many times, and one reason I have not bought her newest Mothership, because that's just too much the same that I already have from her. But I actually like this. However, I think if you're planning to buy this palette, you should be aware it's not really showing on my camera, but these are more, all three of these shades are very glittery, more like topper shades. And I would recommend very much using a glitter glue or at least your finger to apply them with brush. It's very hard to pick them up. This is more of a creamy shade. This you can actually pick up with a brush, but with these three, just so you're aware, there are more toppery shades rather than traditional shimmer shades. And here's the last one of my Pat McGrath palettes. This is the holiday palette from 2 years ago. And it opens, and I actually like the color story of this. I know this wasn't perhaps her more popular Christmas palettes. I, for example, did not like the palette last year. I think even though she first had her colorful mattes for the first time, I think the mattes were very, well, they were something that I, for example, have in my collection because I do have quite a lot of colorful palettes from other brands. So the Christmas palette last year it wasn't enticing for me. However, I actually do like this a lot. However, I actually use this more in the spring than actually on Christmas or holiday time in general, because actually quite a lot of the shimmers are these more sort of spring vibes. The mattes in this, not all of them go with the shimmers. I do occasionally have to use other mattes from other palettes with this, because the mattes are these pinks and browns that she has a lot in her palette. But anyway, this is the last PMG palette, and this is also something just like the rest of them that I am definitely keeping. So next we're going to be having higher end brands that I have palettes like only maybe 1 or 2. Oh, there is one missing. There's the Charlotte Tilbury quad that I have. So let's start with this one. This is the Byredo Remembrance palette. This is actually one of the few higher end brands that I can actually get in store where I live. And this is what it looks like. And this is actually, even though it's very unassuming when you look at the color story, but the mattes in this are very, very nice. I think the only like shade that I have issues with is this shimmery brown. This is very patchy and it's very hard to pick up. I've tried it with fingers, I tried it with brush, it doesn't pick up great with either. But aside from that, the matte shades in this are very beautiful, and the shimmers, particularly if you have very textured lids, and I think if you're an older person, you might actually like the shimmers in this very much. The price of this, I think, was over 100 euros. I think 110 might have been that price that I bought this from. And I think the only complaint for this palette I have is that the packaging, even though it looks quite nice, it actually is feels quite cheap, which is the only complaint. So when you're paying over 100 euros for a palette, you sort of expect that the packaging is also high quality, because this looks beautiful, but sort of when you touch it, you sort of hear a bit of squeezing and it feels very, very light. So the packaging is the only thing that I really have complaints about, but other than that, it's a very beautiful palette, and I'm actually quite excited to see if Byredo comes more with these bigger palettes, so what kind of color stories they will put in them. Next, the only Charlotte Tilbury palette I have actually owned her previous two of the more bigger palettes. I had the original bigger Pillow Talk palette, which had 12 shades, and then I had the Christmas palettes from 3 years ago, I think. But I have decluttered those because I felt that the quality of them didn't last that well. But here we have the Pillow Talk of Dreams. This is the quad, and this is sort of amped up version of the original Pillow Talk. And I have to be very careful with this. You don't see it on camera, but that shade is actually loose. I've tried it. The quality is very nice. I definitely would use fingers with the shimmers. They don't pick up with the brush that well. But the matte quality is nice, and also the shimmers, they are very beautiful once you get into the eyes. Is this worth the... I don't know, I think at this point the quads with her cost almost 50 euros. Is it actually worth the price? I would maybe see if you can get a deal with this, because for 50 euros for 4 shades, it's not, I think, that great. But alas, I still like this a lot. The only complaint I have is that this shade, even though this palette quad I have is relatively new, this is already loose. So I, for example, can't travel with this because I know that that shade will break the moment I will put it into a travel bag. So, Huda palettes. I have two Huda Beauty palettes. I used to have more. I used to have the 9 pans, I believe. At most I owned 4 or 5 of those. However, I don't feel that as I have gotten more palettes and as the quality in palettes general have gone up, not only with higher-end palettes, but with indie and drugstore palettes. So I don't think the quality of those 9 pans really has lasted time that well. So that's why I don't actually have any of those in my collection anymore. But here's the Naughty Nude, so this is the more warm-toned neutral palette from her. And this is very beautiful. I think this is... I'm the person who's very drawn to these pink tones and browns, particularly in autumn, but also around the year. And this is very beautiful. I'm not a fan of this shade. I use it with the glitters in the palette sometimes to make them stick a bit better. But other than that, if we would just forget that shade, I think this would be one of the most perfect palettes for me in my collection. Definitely think that it's worth its price, so if you've been thinking buying it and think that, oh, it's getting to be an older palette or something, but I would still like, if you like the color story, then just buy it, because it is very beautiful and high quality palette. Oh, the Rose Quartz. I know this is a favorite of the many, and for me too, this is one of my, I think, all-time favorites. And this... I think, like what Huda did, she upgraded particularly the shimmer quality, even though in Naughty Nudes the shimmers were already pretty bang, but in this I think she did even better, because while there's, I don't think I would call them like multichromes in this, but they are shifty and they're very dimensional. They are a bit toppery, some of them, but I still think that if you apply with them fingers, you can very, very well layer them and they look very beautiful in the eyes. I know a lot of people use this as their spring palettes, but at least for me, this is something that I do gravitate towards like all around the year. So next we have Tarte. With Tarte, I only have few palettes, so actually 2. So here's the Tartelet Energy. I think this is a relatively new palette. Actually, both of the Tarte palettes, I think, are palettes that have been released this year. And this is what it looks like. I think I saw one review... I think it was Jen Phelps who said it, that this is Don't quote me on that. But anyway, I think in one review I saw it was said that this looks much more exciting in store than it actually is, and I kind of agree with the evaluation. Because while it has like a bit of purple, it has a bit of pinks, and it has a bit of browns, actually when you really start doing looks with this, you most likely get either a neutral look or very pink toned look, because this purple is actually the only true purple. This is even more berry toned, and this too is actually like more of a pink shimmer than actually a purple shimmer. So if you're getting this, just be aware of that the looks you will get this do look pretty similar with each other. So the Big Ego palette, this is the one of the newer palettes. I think after this palette they have only released like the Christmas and holiday palettes that have come out. So this is what it looks like, and I really like the shades in this. I haven't played with this too much. There's one reel that I have done with this, but when making that reel, I was very impressed with the quality of the shades. I do like the shimmers more than the ones that were in the Tarte Energy palette. And I definitely think that if you see this in store and you like it, then I would definitely give it a go. So those were all my high-end palettes. Next, I think we will move to my sort of traditional drugstore palettes, and this will include palettes that are only sold sort of online, but also like in sort of local brick-and-mortar drugstores. And because I'm from Europe, so these brands are brands that are easily available. So first one, actually, this is something that I will be decluttering. This is the I Heart Revolution. This is one of the 5-pan chocolate theme palettes that they came out with, I think, this summer. The quality of this is actually very nice. However, I don't like the tones of this. It's too orangey for me, so there are a few tones of colors that I don't like, and these orangey yellows are something that are not my favorites. And with this, I noticed that there isn't actually a lot of variety. Granted, it's a 5-pan palette, so there is only so much you can do with it, but with this, I thought there would be more depth to it than there actually was. But if you see this, and particularly if you can get it on offer, there's nothing wrong with the quality. The shimmers, I would use fingers, not a brush, so you can get a full impact of them. But other than that, the mattes are okay, and for a drugstore priced palette, this is actually very nice. But the color story is just not for me, so I will be getting rid of this. So this is a second palette that came with the same collection. I'm not gonna open this, and I haven't actually tried this out yet. However, I like the color story because it's more of that pinky neutral color story. I will be trying this later on to see, and if it's the same good quality, but I like the color story more, then I'm definitely keeping this. But just so you know, I haven't tried this, so I can't, for example, vouch what the quality of this is compared to the other palette. This is the MUA Blushing Nudes palette. I'm gonna open this up. I'm definitely gonna say, if you can get MUA at your local store, or if there's an online retailer that you can get this easily from, then I would just grab it. The shimmers in this are like, wow. Like, I've had higher-end shimmers that perform worse than the shimmers in this one. The mattes are also very nice, and there's 3 palettes in this series, and based on the reviews I have seen, all the palettes that are in this series have the same formula quality, so if this is something that you can easily get and you want to try, then you should definitely get it. The price of this, I think, was under 10 euros or something, so it's very affordable. Granted, the packaging is this very cheap plastic packaging, and this might not last very long time, so be careful how you storage it. But other than that, if you're looking for inexpensive good quality shadows, then I would definitely go with this one. They also have 5 pans in the series that also have the same formula, so if you don't like the bigger palettes, then you might want to try one of those. But definitely something that I would say grab it if you like the color stories and you're looking for something inexpensive. Next, we're having W7. So W7 is another inexpensive drugstore brand that's unavailable here most in European countries. They do a lot of dupe products, and so if you're not into brands that straight out dupe other brands' products, then this is probably not a brand for you. However, I do actually like the quality of a lot of their products, and they're very, very affordable. So this is, I think, one of their newer palettes, and this is duping the Huda Beauty. I believe it was her holiday palette last year, and the packaging is shiny and it's not operating well with the camera. So this is what it looks like. I have only done a couple of looks with this, so I can't vouch completely for the quality of it. However, the shades that I have been using, I have really liked them and they have actually lasted well. W7 clearly has several kinds of formulas. I have tried the formulas in some of their sort of rectangular palettes and I really didn't like the formula. That was just very bad. However, the formula in these bigger ones seems to be more consistent, so if you want to try them, I would just get one of the bigger ones. So this is the second W7 palette that I have, and this is obviously duping the Natasha Denona pastel palette. This has an extra row, so the Natasha Denona pastel palette doesn't have this sort of row of neutrals that this has. I'd say this is actually a pretty good dupe. I'd say that if you're someone that uses pastel like only once a year, then maybe you should look for something like this instead of spending the 70 or 60 euros that the Natasha Denona pastels palettes cost these days. Are there shadows like exactly the same quality of the Natasha Denona palettes? Of course they're not. You do have to build these a bit more. The shimmers are actually quite nice. I have nothing to complain about them. They aren't as blinding as perhaps as the Natasha Denona pastel palette shimmers are, so just so you're aware of that, some of these are a bit more muted. Next, Kiko. So Kiko Milano is an Italian drugstore brand, and it's a brand that I have known particularly for having a very consistent quality. It's a very good quality. They aren't the cheapest of drugstore brands, but the quality is very consistent across collections. I think the only downside to Kiko is that they tend to repeat their color stories. So for example, both of the palettes that I have here are Christmas palettes, and I bet the Christmas palettes this year again will be having very similar color stories that they have had in Christmas collections in previous year. It's the same with their autumn collections and spring and summer collections. So that is the only thing that I think you should be aware of when buying Kiko, is trying to see that if you have bought them something from them previously, have they already done that. But this is one of the holiday palettes from last year. This is the smaller one. It's very nice. I do actually like the shimmers. This is something that I use for traveling because it's something that if it gets broken, I'm not gonna be like terribly sorry about it, but it's still very consistent quality, and this is one of those that's just very easy to throw in the bag, and you know every time that when you do a look with this, it's gonna be, the look is gonna be very nice and you don't have to worry about quality issues or anything. This is the second palette, and again this was from the holiday collection. This was one of the bigger palettes, and it looks like this. Oh, both of actually the Kiko palettes, these have been actually gifted to me by a friend, and I'm very thankful for them, so that's also why I'm not decluttering them, because they have been gifts and I do actually use them. Same with this one as the last one. These are very good for travel because you know that you can trust these in terms of the quality and in terms of consistency of getting nice looks out of them, particularly if you're in a hurry. So again, nothing like spectacular, but very consistent, good, decent quality. I think with this one, the only thing is I wish that the Kiko would perhaps be more consistent with their shimmer shades, because with this one, for example, these two, they look very blinding, but actually when you try to pick this or this with your fingers or brush, you tend to only get a little bit of sparkle, even though in the pan it looks like you're gonna get this very opaque sparkle layer, but actually it's more like a topper shade. However, then there's this green one and this purple shade, which are more creamy, and the payout you get from those is very great. So I would hope Kiko would start more using like this and this formula instead of the more topper-like formula that they tend to mix in within their palettes. And next we're having Catrice. So Catrice is a German drugstore brand, and it's also something that's very easily available here, and also it's something that's quite inexpensive. I have noticed that their prices have gone up a little. Well, everything's price is going up these days, but it is still relatively affordable compared to Maybelline or L'Oreal or these like very traditional drugstore brands that are actually very expensive for drugstore brands from where I live. So this is the one of the 5 in the box palettes. I'm not gonna open this because I haven't used this yet, but it's something that I do want to still have in my collection because I do want to get to try this at one point. And I do believe this has gotten actually quite decent reviews. So I want to see and test out how do I like the quality of this. But definitely I think some of these 5 in a box have had not so good quality, but I think most of them have had quite decent quality. So if you're looking for smaller palettes that have a decent quality, then I would perhaps see if these are available, because I think the more neutral ones particularly have gotten really good reviews and the quality in those seems to be more consistent. The issue seems to be with the palettes that have more of these not so neutral shades, but we'll get to that with the next one. So this is the Burgundy palette. This is from the 5 in a Box collection, I think a year or two ago. And when I said that has been some consistency issues with the not so neutral shade, this is one of them, because this has this sort of reddish burgundy shade. And this is definitely a shade that you cannot use on its own. It is quite patchy, and you definitely need the help of this one or even this more dark brown to make it look nice. And I believe there was a similar issue in the blue. There was sort of this darker blue palette that came with this, and the blue also in that I believe was quite hard to work with. However, what I do like about this is one of, I think, my most used travel palettes, and particularly this and the shimmer shades, when you apply with them your finger, they're very impactful, and every time, despite this one shade of being a bit of an issue, every time I have used this, I have managed to get a very nice, more of a dark sultry look. So definitely, even though it has its issues, this is a palette that I'm still going to keep and hang on to the day that I'm most likely going to pan these two shades. Then I will most likely get rid of it, but it's not today. So the Slim Pro palettes, Catrice they have two launches. They have the fall edit and they have the spring edit. They also do have some limited edition collections like Christmas and Easter and that type of collections in between, but the more regular launches they do when they launch a big amount of products is in their fall and spring launch. And this spring they actually didn't come out with one of these, so I'm kind of worried that if they have completely quit with this line, because I actually do like the quality. Not all of the palettes in this line are great, but most of them have been good. So this is from the one from last spring, and this is what it looks like. And this is very good quality all around. I think the only shades that have sort of caused issues is this more minty blue shade, but other than that, I really have liked this palette and the looks that I have come out with this. And I'd say that if you can find this somewhere then and think the color story is something that you will get use out of, then I would definitely recommend getting it. Next one. So this is, I think, from quite many years ago, and I think I might have to declutter this. I actually like the color story of this a lot more compared to the last one. However, I noticed I recently did a reel with this because I wanted to use something, I wanted to do a full face of Catrice with the new fall edit products. However, I noticed particularly that this shade has hard panned, and also the shimmer shade, this one, it's not as soft and creamy as it used to be. The mattes I think are still quite okay, but I think the shimmers in this that I have also been a very important part of why I like this palette. If those are not performing anymore, then I really think I will be letting this go. Because I have so many other palettes in my collection, so keeping this one for a few matte shades that I still think I do have multiple times over with my other palettes, I don't think it's worth it. So unfortunately, even though I do like the color story of this, because the formula hasn't aged well, this will be going to the bin. Next are my BeautyBay palettes, and BeautyBay, even though it's not something that you can get in store, well, actually these days I think if you're living in UK you might get this, because I have noticed that on Superdrug's website they do now have BeautyBay, so I don't know if someone's from UK you can tell that if you can get this now on store, but for rest of it in the Europe you have to order this from the BeautyBay website. And generally, I do think BeautyBay make their own brand makeup quality is quite good. I have quite a lot of their products, and most of those have worked for me. But I think now we will go through the palettes. I think there's going to be one palette here that I will be getting rid of. First one, this is the neutral palette. This is the 16 pan version of it, so this is one of those palettes that has a 9 pan, which is a mini. Then there's the 16 pan version, and then they have this very huge 42 pan versions. I have few of the palettes within this series that are the big ones, and you will be seeing them soon. But this is the neutral palette, and this is how it looks like. So the shimmers in this aren't the same sparkly shimmers that they have in their other palettes. These are more of these satin type of shimmers. However, they are very impactful and they are very nice when you put them on the lid. This is one of the newer BeautyBay palettes that I have in my collection, and I still want to try this out more, and I actually do like this more cool toned neutrals color story of it, so this is definitely a keep, even though the shimmers aren't as sparkly as I perhaps would like them to be. And the next is the Rich palette. This isn't no longer the newest one because the BeautyBay came out recently with this sort of cool, really cool purple blue palette, but this is the second newest palette in their line. And this too I have in the 16 pan version, and this is how it looks like. And this has the more of a sparkly shimmers that I like from the brand. And the few shades that I have tried from this, they work very well. I think if you're someone with a fair skin tone, you should be aware that the looks with this will be quite deep. If you get the 42 pan version, that has much more of the lighter blending shades, but if you get the 16 pan version, just so you're aware, most of the looks are gonna be a bit deeper. But I actually like it about this palette, and I do like that you can get these more deeper looks with this one. Definitely, I think you're perfect sort of fall warm tone palette, and it's definitely a keep for me. So the Midnight palette, how should I say this? This is perhaps something that I should not have bought because it has colors that I don't gravitate towards. So as you can see, it's this sort of very blue, purpley, black, silver type of color story. And I love the shimmers in this. I think, swatched them once, and the shimmers are very pretty. However, I have not used this on my eyes a single time. However, I do want to have some sort of selection of these kind of shades from the brand, so that is, I think, the reason I'm keeping this, and I will be making it my mission to use this during the next half of a year to see that if this is actually a palette that I want to keep in my collection, because I also don't want to keep palettes in my collection just because I sort of want to have a certain color story from a brand, but I don't actually use them. Okay, so this is the palette that I'm decluttering, and this is definitely something that I should not have bought in the first place, because when you're gonna see, this has, I think, all the sort of tones that I don't usually use. It has very sort of dark purples and dark blues, and it has sort of acid greens, and the colors themselves are not the issue, it's the tone of the colors. And the shimmer quality of this is very nice. All the shimmers are these very pretty, very sparkly shimmers. But the color story as a whole is just not something that is for me. And I have actually tried this few times, so I can now safely say that it's not just for me, and I'm going to be getting rid of this one. I think this is also going to be now the last limited edition palette that I had from them, and after this I won't be having any more limited edition palettes from BeautyBay in my collection. Okay, next the big ones. So like I said, I have two palettes in the very big 42 pan format, and I don't think I'm gonna get this to the... Yeah. Okay, so now you can sort of see all the shades of it. So I'm gonna be honest, I have the pink one below this, and with the pink one I could have gone with the 16 pan version, but because pink is my absolutely favorite eyeshadow shade, I wanted to buy the bigger one. I think actually from the 42 pans that I have seen that they have come out with, and purely from a color story perspective, I think the earthy one is the only one that is actually worth having a 42 and a 16 pan version. And my logic for that is that this actually has some greens, but it also, aside from these green, it also has these reds and sort of mustardy yellows and browns. So the 16 pan version of this, if you have seen it, it has just the greens. So I think there is a true added value, like if you're comparing them and you don't only want greens, that you want something else with the greens, then get the 42 one, because the 42 version of this has these couple of rows down here that have bring something extra to the 40 pan version compared to the 16 pan version of this. But if you just want the green shades, then I think you can manage with the 16 pan one, but I wanted the bigger one because it had the two rows below. And then the berry one. So like I said, from color story wise, I could have managed with the 16 one. Yes, okay, this has some purples, but if you remember the Midnight palette that I have, that also has purples. So if you have the Midnight, and particularly if you have the bigger version of the Midnight and this, then you can manage with the 16-pan version of the pink, because if you have the bigger Midnight palette and this bigger berry palette, then you are bound to have double shades with the purple rose. But I love pink, and that's the only reason I wanted this big one. You do get quite similar looks. Like, I think I had this in my palette rotation last year, which is basically I have like a rotation from my makeup that I change it up every 2 weeks. And after I think the first week, I noticed that in the second week the looks were getting very similar, because you're bound to get pretty much only pink looks or then some purple looks with some pink accents if you're using this. But as a whole, I have to say the quality is good. I haven't found any dot shades, which is quite a miracle, considering that if you have 42 shades, then you would think that you're bound to have some shades that aren't as good as others. But the quality is pretty consistent. Some of the shimmers are the very sparkly shimmers, and the other shimmers are the more sort of satiny shimmers, but all the shimmers perform well, and also with the mattes, like I said, no issues. So this has been more of an indulgence palette for me rather than a palette of convenience in terms of how big it is, but I still like it a lot. So this is the sort of last traditional drugstore palette that I have, and this is the Morphe Big Primpin, yeah, and 35X. This was a Christmas gift from my brother, I think, a few years ago. And I have a very particular purpose for this palette and why it is still in my collection. I think Morphe eyeshadow quality is very decent. I think if you're looking to buy makeup for someone who wants to get makeup for the first time, like a teenager or preteen, definitely I would recommend Morphe, because it's not something too expensive, but it's actually something that is going to perform, so it's not going to be like a play makeup. So how do I use this palette? First of all, because these are like peachy and warm tone neutrals, the shadows perform well. I have had no issues with them. The shimmers are the more, how would I say, perhaps more muted shimmers. If you're looking for these very, very sparkly indie shimmers, you're not gonna get those from this. What I actually use this palette for is that because I have some all shimmer indie palettes that have these more sort of more neutral shimmers that shift, and because those are all shimmer palettes, I do need some mattes to work with them. So that is actually the purpose why I still keep this, is that with those palettes I use this as the matte palette. So next we're gonna go to the indie palettes, and I think for me my indie shadow craze, I think it began maybe 2 years ago that I got my first indie palettes, and I have some European indie brands here, but there are also some US-based indie brands here, and that is because these days we have Monolith Shop, which is a European retailer that stocks most of the sort of very hyped US indie brands. So it's nice that we have a European retailer for those, because if we order anything from the States, the shipping cost, particularly after the pandemic, those have been very high. Also, the shipping times are usually pretty long, even with well, if you get this very expensive express shipping, then that's very fast, but even with the basic shipping rates, usually it can take almost a month for the products to arrive. Then we have to pay the custom fees, and we do have to pay the value-added tax when those are imported here. So that's why it's nice to have European retailers, so the shipping times are more manageable, and also the shipping costs are more manageable. First, I'm gonna start with some brands that there are only like a couple of palettes, and then there's gonna be last the GlossGods and Oden eye palettes, because those I have bigger piles to go through. First, Warriors Were Pink. This is actually a palette that has been in my palette rotation, and this is the first palette that I have bought from Gourmande Girls and tried from the brand. And this is a palette that was done in collaboration with Syria Soso, and also this has a very good purpose, because I do believe the collaborator of this suffers from breast cancer and have been going to treatment for those. So if you're buying this palette, you know that also there's a good purpose, because I know she's getting the proceeds to pay for her treatment, and is also generally raising awareness for the illness and treatment of it. And this is what the shades look like, and I would usually prefer having a half and half ratio with mattes and shimmers, But nevertheless, even though this is matte heavy, the mattes are very beautiful. I was very surprised how well, because with sometimes indie brands, particularly with mattes, there can be quite a lot of variation of how good the mattes are. But definitely, I'd say that if you haven't tried Gourmande Girls, I would recommend trying them, because I so far have been very impressed with the mattes and also with the shimmers, even though I would have liked to have more of them. But both are very, very good quality, and definitely a brand I think that I will be trying out more palettes from in the future. So Cosmic Brushes is next, and this is definitely a brand that I first was a bit questioning, like, yeah, is this really worth the hype? Because I think the hype for this brand began last year, and it began with this palette. So here is what it looked like. And the Serenity palette. So for me, the colors, they are a bit on the limit. Are there really something that I use? Because this has more of these sort of acid tones that are perhaps not my favorites. However, in terms of quality, the quality is very on par with the other palettes that the brand has come out. And I do have to say this brand has a spectacular matte quality considering how affordable it is. Also, the shimmers are like very, very pretty. This is a brand that tends to put more mattes than shimmers into their palette, so just so you're aware of that. However, I have then pulled out also some of my other indie shimmers with this when I feel that the shimmers that come with these palettes aren't like enough for me. But like I said, the matte quality is very spectacular, and there has been like much more expensive palettes that have had worst performing mattes. So this is the next one, and this is the Delicious Delights, and this was, I think, the pastel palette of the past summer that everyone was craving for and everyone tried to get. I managed to get this on the first launch, and I think I was one of the lucky ones, because I don't think this sold out as fast as some of their previous palettes at launch, but also I do know that the brand is still restocking this, so there are still it's still possible to get this for those people who have not got this in previous launches. But this is what it looks like. The pastel shade quality is very, very good, particularly again considering how inexpensive these are. This was a bit more expensive than the other palettes because it has a multichrome shade in the corner. It's the pink one in the below the matte white shade. But I would, of course, before buying this, think that do you really like pastels that much that you actually want to buy separate palettes for them. This does have actually some deepening up shades, so you don't need a companion palette necessarily. But because it is still primarily a pastel palette, then I would first make the consideration if pastels are your thing, and then if you think that is so, then maybe try to grab this, because I think it's a very good first pastel palette, and again with the price it is still much more inexpensive than, for example, the Natasha Denona pastel palette, even though it was priced a bit higher than the previous palettes in the line. So this is the Royal Rose palette. This was actually their first palette. I know many people usually think it was the Serenity, but I believe this is actually their first one. This is no longer available. I think I got this in the last restock when they launched the Muse palette, and I thought that, well, might as well buy both of them since I was making an order. And this is what it looks like. This is definitely a summer palette for me, because it has this sort of brighter, warmer tones. The quality of this is very consistent with other palettes within the brand, but I don't think there is anything more that I can really say from this, because, like I said, you can't get in anymore. But if you have it, I would definitely try to make use of it, because I do think the color story is very, very beautiful, and it's very sort of this warm toned palette with some pops of color. And this is the Muse palette, and this was actually the first palette from the brand that really made me want to try the brand out. And this is what it looks like. And what makes this palette particularly attractive for me is that it has these very sort of muted earthy tones, but it also has this sort of pink and darker purples. Like I said, purples aren't my primary favorite colors, but if they're these sort of very light lilac-y purples, or then this sort of more dark muted purples, then I can get on board with them. This is a very beautiful palette, and I definitely say that if you feel that the other palettes within this line are maybe too colorful for you, then maybe start with this one, because this is definitely like more approachable if you're someone who likes neutrals more than colorful shades. Okay, next I think we will be doing Blend Bunny. So from Blend Bunny there are two palettes that I own. So there's the Dollhouse and then there's the Sugar and Grunge, and I'm actually very excited for the Sickly Sweet palette to come in the next Monolith launch, so I think that's gonna be the next palette that I will be getting from them. But this is what the Dollhouse palette looks like. I think this is actually one of my favorite Blend Bunny palettes. The Sugar and Grunge, while it has more colors, I actually like the quality of this a lot more, and I will be talking about the perhaps a bit issues I had with the Sugar and Grunge palette, but with this, there is absolutely nothing I can complain about the quality. The shimmers are very beautiful, they're very buttery, they are very sparkly, and they last all day on the lids. The mattes, all the lighter, the darker, the mid-tone mattes, they all work so well, and I think it's amazing that Blend Bunny, while it's not the most inexpensive of brands, it's still quite relatively affordable for an indie brand. So for the price that they are offering their palettes and the formula they're able to offer, it's very amazing. And I definitely say that if you have been eyeing a Blend Bunny and want to try them, then I would very much recommend giving them a try. And if you're looking for a more neutral option from them, I think the Dollhouse palette is actually a very good option. So the Sugar and Grunge. This is a palette I was very excited for. I like the theme of the palette, this sort of 90s grunge with the roses and then some colors. And here is what the palette looks like. So I know this is favorite for the many creators, and I have to say that the mid-tone and dark mattes, I have had no issues with. Those work just as great as the mattes in the Dollhouse. However, what I have had issues with are the more pastel mattes compared to the more pastel mattes in the Dollhouse palette. I actually do have to build up quite a lot of these mattes. I think I can also do a comparison with the Cosmic Brushes pastel palette, and even with those I don't feel like I have to do so much building as I have to do with the pastels of this one. And it's very odd because I think the more sort of matte pastel formula in the Dollhouse palette was very good, so I don't know, did I get a bad palette or something else. Also, the second issue I have is with the shimmers. So some of the, particularly this one and this one, are more like toppery shimmers, and they actually already felt dry in the pan when I tried this in the first time. The more opaque shimmers, these ones over here, those are very nice and I have no issues with them, but the more topper-like shimmers, they feel quite dry in the pan. I really have to rub my finger in them to get any sort of payout with them. So I wasn't such a big fan of this one, even though I expected that I would be loving this palette because it had more colors to it and because of the theming of it. So the next one is from Little Cosmetics, so it's a German indie brand. I have one palette from them, and even though it is in this packaging, this is not the... They have a pre-made palette with this packaging, but this is actually a custom palette from inside, so I'm gonna show it right now. There's the card, and this is what it looked like. So this is the first Little palette that I have tried, and so far I'd say I'm pretty impressed. I think the mattes are very good quality. They aren't perhaps the most spectacular mattes that I have ever tried, but I think for the price that they are offering their matte shades, it's very good, and I do get quite nice looks from them. The shimmers are very nice also. I do say a lot of these shimmers, I think almost all of the shimmers are supposed to be some sort of like shifty shimmers or something like that. They aren't the most shifty duochrome multi-chrome shades that you will find on the market, but they aren't also the most expensive ones, because the very shifty multi-chromes, those cost a lot. So I'd say if you're looking for an indie brand from Europe that you want to maybe dip into your toes to shifty shades but don't really want to pay high prices, then I think Little is a good brand to start from. And so the next palettes are from Glamshop. So for those who don't know, Glamshop is a Polish indie brand. It's another indie brand that's very easily available for us living in Europe. And I definitely also say that if you're looking for an indie brand that is priced relatively affordably, then I think Glamshop is a very good place to start with. And they are actually one of the few indie brands who also offer full face of like makeup products. So aside from palettes, they actually do have base products, and they have cheek products, and they even, I think, have some skincare now. But I think the first palette is this one. So this is a custom-made palette, and I'm gonna have to be careful with this because some of these are a bit broken. Here you go. So these are individual multichrome shadows that I have bought from them. Glamshop also has several formulas. They have these very sort of smooth shimmers that I think this is a good example of, but they also have these very chunky shimmers, and you can't apply these with brushes. You definitely need to use your fingers. And how I like to apply this first is that I pick them up with my finger, then I rub the finger to the palm of my hand so that it will smooth over like the chunkiest shades, and then I apply them to my eyes. I definitely say that if you have lids that have a lot of texture to them, then these probably don't look that flattering on you. But then they also have this sort of smoother shades, so those should be like good to go also to more mature lids, and also if you like to use brushes rather than fingers. But these are definitely not going anywhere. I like these a lot, and and of course I have to use these with another matte palette, but they are still very good shades, and I'm not getting rid of them. So this is one of their 9-pan palettes. I believe this is discontinued. I think they have actually recently discontinued a lot of their 9-pan palettes. So, but Glamshop has a habit of doing that. They discontinue palettes and then they bring the color stories back with a bit of variation, but it's basically similar color stories. And this is how it looks like. Glamshop mattes are a bit powdery. I think that's definitely something that you should be aware of when you're buying from the brand. This palette has more of the sort of traditional shimmers that aren't chunky, that you can actually also apply with a brush. The matte quality with Glamshop, it's relatively okay. It's not the best that I have ever tried, but it's definitely workable, and considering the shimmer shades that they offer, and if you like the color stories, then I would not say that the mattes are something that you should not buy from them. Okay, so the next two palettes I'm gonna show together because they are basically companion palettes to each other, and I think they came with the same collection. So this is the matte one. Okay, I'm not gonna be able to show them together, but so this is their sort of matte neutral collection. They came out originally with, I think, a year or two ago. However, they have recently relaunched some of the products from this collection. The matte palette is still available last time I checked from their site, but the shimmer palette that I do think is one of the star of the show, the shimmer palette so far has not been bought back. And I don't understand why, because the shimmers are one of the most beautiful neutral shimmers that I have ever worked with. And some of these have shifts, some of them are just basic shimmers, but these are very nice, very smooth. Similarly to mattes, I'm not usually a fan of all matte palettes. However, what makes these unique is that they are the tones of neutral mattes that I don't really have in my other matte palettes. These are more gray tones and more purpley toned mattes compared to the more neutral and traditional warm toned mattes that we get a lot in neutral palettes. But anyway, like I said, the matte palette is still available. I think if you're working makeup artists, I think it would be actually quite good addition to your kit. Unfortunately, the shimmer palette, as I've shown here, it's no longer available, but if you have it, I would recommend you taking it out and using it because it's very beautiful. This is a spring palette from, I think, a year ago, and this is what it looks like. I believe the English name for this was Seduction or something like that. If you're Polish, you can correct me if I was wrong. And this is what it looks like. And this is definitely very beautiful. It's sort of, how should I say, it's a neutral peachy pink with cool tone purples, and the shimmers in this are just very, very beautiful. Again, this has some of the more chunkier shimmers, so not all of these will apply well with the brush, but it's something that I can live with and work with, and definitely one of my favorite palettes from the brand altogether. This is the last palette I have from Glamshop. This is one of their very old palettes. I think this might have been a New Year's or a holiday palette, but this is like very, very old and hasn't been available for a long time. And here we go. I think this is something that I will still keep in my collection, but I definitely think that maybe next year, especially, Glamshop has now a few palettes that have made me think that I will be making an order from them. Glamshop is one of those brands that I like to then make a bigger order rather than ordering individually, because even though they're European-based indie brand, their shipping prices are quite high. I think they're 15 euros to something or something, even though, of course, we don't get any additional cost because they come inside from the European Union, but still, because their shipping costs are quite high for an inside Europe brand, I rather make a bigger order than order individual items and pay for the high shipping costs. But anyway, I think, like I said, at some point, probably next year, particularly if I order some of the new products, this is probably gonna go, but from now, I think this can stay, because I do still actually like quite many of the shades, and it is very, how should I say, autumn appropriate. Okay, so we're getting to the home stretch. Before we're gonna go to the GlossGods and Oden size piles, which are the biggest one, I just remembered I do actually have a couple of Adept palettes, so we're gonna go through those fast. And from the Adept palettes, because they are quite expensive, we can now get these on Monolith Shop. There is only the one Adept palette that I have actually originally ordered all the way from State. The couple of others have been ordered from Monolith, but still, even though you can order them from Monolith Shop, they are quite expensive, so none of these are going away. Anyway, this is the Minka palettes. Like I said, not going anywhere. I'm just gonna say, I think they should have just put 2 other shimmers at the end of the palettes. It's very... You can't get variety with the... There's basically like a dark purple and then a light purple, and the rest are shimmers. So I would rather that they had put like 2 more shimmers there and forgone the mattes, because you can't still make this a standalone palette with just 2 of the matte shades that are very similar in color. But if we forget the mattes, the shimmers are like very beautiful and very shimmery. Something I think you should be aware is that these are like very 2 smooth shimmers. You can pick these up with a brush, but the rest are very chunky. And I know some of you don't like very chunky glitters, so if you're planning to buy this, then just be aware that most of the glitters are these sort of very chunky glitters that you will have to apply with your finger and have quite a lot of sparkle in them. So, Plain Jane, this is the one that I ordered all the way from States. I think this actually might be one of the first indie palettes that I actually got, and it was very expensive considering that I only made 1 order and it took forever to get to me, but alas, I got it and I am very happy owning it. So this is especially beautiful for springtime. The shimmers are these sort of very spring, bright tones. There's pinks, there's greens, there's a golden yellow. It's very pretty, and I definitely think that if you like this sort of color story and you want these type of more shifty shimmers, most of them are duochromes. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 multichrome there. But if you want to try some shifty shimmers and you like the tones, then this is definitely a good palette to get, and I would recommend it. This is my newest Adept palette, and I am very happy person for getting this. So I got the Sumerian Sunset in the last Monolith drop that they did, and here it is. I do believe Adept is going to restock this on their own website somewhere, I think next time. So if you didn't manage to get this, then you still have the possibility, and I know this has been a palette that many people want to get. Something that I will say that I'm not exactly a fan of, even though this has more matte shades in it than the Minka palette, and you would think that you would get complete looks with this, but I'm not a fan of the matte quality. Even the 2 darker ones, this red one and then this green one over here, you might think you get some depth with them, but I tried to really build them, and they still are more like a wash of color on your lid. So I'd say with this one, if you want to get many cohesive looks, you will have to go for mattes in your other palettes, because the mattes are very sheer that come with this one. So I think if Adept wants to start bringing more mattes, they really have to work on their matte formula, especially considering that these aren't exactly cheap palettes. Now we're gonna get to the 2 biggest piles, which are from both actually Swedish indie brands that are very easy for me to get. And first, I think we're gonna start with GlossGods, and I have almost all of the GlossGods palettes. There's like maybe 1 or 2 that I don't own, but most of them. So let's start with the new ones. So this is the Lavender Skies, and I'm gonna already say the Lavender Skies and the second new palette that came with this one, those have broken shades in them. The brand was very kind and they immediately like responded to me. They asked me to send the pictures and they actually refunded my whole order. I believe they might have had some issues in their storage or the company that was packaging them, and they said that they would deal with that. But they at that point said that they want to rather refund me the whole order than start sending a new palettes and see if those come out broken. And it was strange because previously GlossGods packaging has been very sturdy and very good. I have never had issues before these two that palettes have gone broken, but I am very happy how the customer service personnel handled my issue, and I will be buying from the brand again. So let's just hope that in the future the palettes will come in one piece. But anyway, back to the palette itself. I'm going to be very careful with this. So the shade that was broken, I think it was this one. I managed to repress it and you can see that there's oils have spilled in it, but it doesn't affect the performance of the shadows. All the looks you will get this are very purple, and that's actually more to do with the matte shades than actually the shimmer shades within the palette. The shimmer shades are beautiful and they have beautiful shifts to them, but the mattes, actually a lot of them look the same. You can get some depth with this purple over here, but I think they should have maybe put something else than these really sort of just purple and blue toned mattes to bring some variety to this piece. Because for example, this yellow one, it's really, I find it quite difficult to use this yellow and red shimmers along with the other mattes because the mattes don't have the same color variety of the shimmers. But even though I would have liked some variety of the mattes, it's still a very beautiful palette and I will be still using it, and the quality of it itself is very good. So this is the second one, and like I said on the previous palette, this is also has a broken shade, so just be prepared for that. So this was the Color of the Rain, and this was sort of continuation to the two palettes they did, I think, previous summer, and I will be showing them later on, but let's just see how this looks like. And again, the broken shade is this one, but again, I managed to repress it, and the palette is very beautiful. There's this random black shade, which I know is, you can sort of use it as a change the effect of the shimmer shades by applying them to a black base, but I would just rather they have made this like a completely all shimmer palette, because the matte, if it only has one matte, then I'm not gonna probably use it because I will be reaching for other palettes anyway for the matte shades. Then this was their Christmas palette last year, the Smoke and Mirrors, and I don't manage to get it on the camera. Yeah, I think that's better. I got this as a Christmas present from my brother last year, and it looks like this. This is not my favorite color story. Gray tones and blacks generally aren't my fave. I also am not a fan of silvers. I also have a critique for this palette. A lot of the shimmers look the same when you get them to the eyes. Basically, this one and this one and even this one look very similar once you get them to the eyelids, and similar to this and this one. Also with the mattes, this and this practically look the same when you get them to the eyes. So this doesn't actually have that much variety, even though it has this many shades in it. I'm still gonna keep it because A, it was a gift, and B, there are still occasions that I do look for this kind of a palette, but it's not my favorite color stories, and the shades don't really offer that much variety as it might initially look, so just so you're aware. I'm not sure if this is even available, because I believe this might have even been a limited edition one, but if you like your smoky grays and you have it, then definitely it's a good quality and you will get some very glamorous looks out of it. So, Vintage Glam. So this, and then there's the neutral palette that's below this one. So this is the part of the neutral palette collection they came out with. And this looks like, here you go. And this is a very sort of pink toned neutral palette, and I actually like this one more than I like the neutral palette that came along with this one, probably because I like pink tones in general, but the neutral palette is also very beautiful. I actually do like that this has enough variety in terms of depth. You have this sort of really dark brown, and I also don't feel that any of the shimmers like look very similar, and also I think with the mattes they aren't really dupes within this palette. So I think if you're looking for this sort of pink neutral palette with maybe some pops of purple, this would be a very good option, and like I said, there are shifts in the shimmers, so it will look very special once you get it into the eyelids. And this is a new neutral palette, so this is sort of the neutral palette that GlossGods has, and here we go. This is very beautiful, and I think if you're really looking for this basic neutral palette, this is a good place to start with. My only complaint I have is this shade. So this shade was already quite dry when I got the palette, and I did ask from some other creators who bought this that did they feel that this was dry, and most of them said that no, so I think I might have gotten that palette. And now actually, because this is already beginning to be a year old, this is actually just pure like hard glitter right now. So this is something that I could maybe try to repress it, but I think I'm at a point where I can like live without using this shade, because the rest of the shades are very nice and I don't usually gravitate towards these very dark sparkly shades. But like I said, I'm not gonna hold it against the palette because I most likely just got a bad shade, because the rest of the palette works very well and the shimmers are very beautiful, and it's a very beautiful basic neutral palette, and definitely another recommendation from the brand. So now for the brand sort of summer palettes from a year ago. So this is the first one. This is the Looking for the Rainbows, and this is an very traditional rainbow all shimmer palette. It's very beautiful. I think it has also in terms of formula, because I was afraid some of these are these sort of very creamy shimmers, so I was afraid that within half a year they might dry out, but they are still very usable and you get very pretty looks out of them. This is not a standalone palette, so I have to use this as a companion palette with others. However, for example, with the Cosmic Brushes pastel palette that they came out with this year, this has been a very good companion palette for that. And the next one, which is the more green toned all shimmer, I think this was a bit of a random palette in terms because it's so specific. So this is basically a green toned all shimmer palette, and all the shimmers do have some type of shifts to them, but they are basically green tones. So this is what it looks like, and it's very beautiful. It has this sort of one darker gold. I'm not usually a fan of this type of like dark and yellow gold shades, but so this one and this one. But it's very beautiful. Some of the greens shift more to blues and some of them have more purple shift, but it's like I said, it was a bit random considering that the other one was a complete rainbow palette and then they chose to go with the like a all green theme, but it's still very pretty, and if you like your green shimmers then definitely would recommend this because the quality is very good. Then we're gonna go what started it all. So I think what got GlossGods very popular among the indie makeup community was their Girl on the Moon and Girl on the Mars palettes, and I have them both. So the Girl on the Moon palette is actually the first one I got from them, and here is what it looks like. And this, you can see that it was sort of their first palettes and they were still trying out the formula. So there are a couple of shades here that aren't really practical to use. It's this one, and these two look like very smooth ones. But even though I use a primer with this one, and even though I don't use a primer, and even though I try to set my lid, they crease every time, and they basically crease so badly that by the end of the day I don't have anything on my eyelids. And in the Gal in the Mars palette there is actually two similar shades, so both of these palettes sort of have two dot shades, and I know they haven't used this formula since the release of this palette, so I think they might have gotten feedback that the formula wasn't very good. And the last one, Girl in the Mars, and this is definitely my kind of all shimmer palette because it has pinks and these sort of pinky golds and some of these more sort of lilac purples. This has, again, this one and this one are those sort of dot shades that just crease away and are practically unusable. But if you forget those two very beautiful shades, and just like Girl in the Moon palette, I'm very happy to own this, and this was a very good first palette to try from the brand. We're about to get to the end of this declutter, and last brand is the Oden side, and again it's one of my, I think, favorite indie brands, though I think lately, because there has been so other indie brands that have come out with such a great products, I don't think I have been buying from them as much, and I certainly don't have any more this need to buy everything that the brand comes out with, because the brand has had quite a lot of palettes, so even with them there has beginning to be some repetition amongst their own palettes, so I certainly don't need everything from them. But first there's the Saga of Freya, and I'm actually gonna like group these, so I have I have all 3 of them. So there's the double-sided palette that has the pink side, and then it has the green neutral side. So definitely a keep. I think the formula has lasted time quite well because I think it's getting like a few years old, the collection as a whole. Then we have the Tears of Freya, so it's this one. This is something that I will probably declutter at some point, not now, but the issue I have with this one is that it has quite a lot of, it doesn't have a lot of depth, so all the looks you will get this are pretty soft, and also the tones themselves aren't that original. Like the more special shades in this is this one, this more pinky gold shimmer in it, and this also has a bit of pink shift, and then there's the lilac. But aside from that, the shades are quite these sort of basic neutral shades that I have a lot in my collection and even in other Oden side palettes. But I still want to keep this in my collection, and there are occasions that I use it, so that is why I'm also not getting rid of it right now, even though it's not one of my favorites. And then there's the last palette, which is the Cat with the Golden Carriage. And this is definitely one of, I think, the more unique color stories that the brand has come out with, and it's definitely one of my favorites. I love the combination of the sort of oranges with the mints and the shimmer shades. All like 4 of them are very beautiful and they're very impactful. And definitely I think it's one of their better palettes. Okay, this is the newer one. I haven't tried this yet, so I can't vouch for the quality. They came out with a green golden palette with along with this one, but because I have the BeautyBay Earthy palette, that means that I felt that I didn't need the other palette in this line. But here it is, and it's very sort of cool toned mauves, and I'm excited to get to try this, and this was sort of meant to be their take on a neutral collection, and I think they executed really well. So this is the palette that I will be decluttering from Oden side, and it's the Solmon palette, and I want to emphasize this, that I have no complaints about the quality itself. Well, there is actually the one shade, it's the pink glitter one in the middle, that is actually quite dry. However, the tones in the palette are just not something that I gravitate towards, particularly because it has this sort of very yellow, golden, orangey tones at the bottom that aren't my favorite, and also this sort of turquoisey blue ones. Here, I like my blues also to be more muted or pastel-like. So this is just a palette that doesn't get used in my collection, and that is the reason why I'm going to let it go. This is the second Oden Eyes palette that I will be decluttering, and this is being decluttered because I have some quality issues with it. So this is the Norns palette, and this has been recently reformulated. I can't comment on the formula of the new one. However, with this one, the mattes actually do feel quite dry, and also some of the shimmer shades aren't as good as the shimmers, particularly in their new palettes. Also, I feel that with the bottom row, these shimmers are very beautiful, but I don't feel like that they go with the rest of the palette. So every time I have opened this, I sort of feel that I would kind of need like these shades make a palette of their own, and then I would need another palette to use these ones. So this is a palette that doesn't get used because I don't feel that the quality is on par, and also because I feel that it's not quite of a cohesive palette, and that's why I'm letting it go. So here's the Alva palette, and this is one of their original palettes, and this is beautiful. This formula, Oden's formula, has definitely come quite a long way since this was made, but I actually still like it despite it being the older formula. And this is just very beautiful neutral palette with pinks and yellows, and this is definitely a summer favorite for me. Next we have, this is the newest palette in the collection, so this is the Little Ghost palette from Angelica Nyqvist and Oden's Eye. So this is the Little Ghost palette, and even though this has purples and blues that I don't usually gravitate towards, I feel that these are tones that I still get a use out of. This also has the sort of warm bottom row, and then there's actually the sort of more neony yellow that I prefer to more of the orange toned yellows. This is definitely something that I have tried a few times, and there's a reel or two that I have done with this, but I'm not still gonna conclusively say how I like the quality. I need to try this out a bit more. What I will say is that, and I think a lot of creators have said that this particular matte purple is a bit of a dud. And I would agree, you can't really blend it. It's just once you apply it to a lid, it really just stays there. So you can use it for deepening up, but you can't use it for blending. But so far with the other shades, I haven't had any issues, and I'm very happy that Angie got another collab with the brand, and I think it's a very, very beautiful palette. The reason why I didn't get the other palettes, you will see it soon, because I actually have the Christmas palettes from last Christmas, and I feel that the second palette she made was too close to the original Merry Christmas palette. And here's the original Hela palette, and this is one of my spring palettes. This is no longer available, however, I do think they restocked this quite many times, and this is just perfection. This doesn't have a single dot shade for me. All of the shades are just beautiful, and I would definitely recommend using this if you happen to own this palette. And definitely just wonderful, and I can see why the brand did a second collab with her, because I know this first one was such a great success. And then the last ones of the declutter, so these aren't also going anywhere. I know a lot of people wanted this, and I seem to be lucky, one of the few lucky ones that got them. I know they restocked this collection once, but I still know many people are asking them to come back with this. So first is the Merry Christmas one. And this is the reason why I didn't get the other palette in the new Angie and Oden collection, because I feel it was too close to this one. I actually like the blue palette, the Christmas Eve palette, more, and that is because even though this has actually shades that I do like, it has like no purple, it has reds, and it has these sort of muted oranges, and it has pinks, and green tones are actually green tones that I like. They are the more earthy green tones, or these sort of pastel green tones. However, I do feel that you sort of have like two palettes smashed into one and actually mixing the two shades. Even though I have tried it, I still feel that if I want to do something else than a red look or a green look, combining these two can be a bit of a challenging for my makeup preferences. But still, the quality is beautiful, and the shimmers in this are absolutely perfect. And last palette, yay, we're at the end. So I was quite surprised that I actually liked this more than the Merry Christmas one, which I initially thought would be the more palette that I would like more. So with this, I feel there's much more cohesion, and you can much more easier mix the shades that come in this palette. And I just feel that all the looks that I get this with are they are glamorous, they are sophisticated, they are just so beautiful, and the shimmers are very sort of nice, cool tone, sparkly shimmers, and they all complement each other. So I can definitely understand why people are quite sad, particularly that these two palettes were such a short-lived one, because I think they are one of the best ones the brand has come out with. So thank you to everyone who made it to the end. I know it was a very rambly video, and like I said, it's the first time I have made a video while speaking, so it is of course always very awkward for the first time, and like I mentioned or put it into the text in the beginning of the video, English is not my first language, and I'm a bit out of practice. There was a time in my life when I used to use English more, but now I have gotten a little bit rusty. If you want to see more videos with my palettes or with my other products from my makeup collections, maybe I could do some reviews or do some rankings. I could also do the makeup weekly news and tell my opinion about new products. You can comment below. And if you like the videos, leave the like and subscribe. I will most likely focus also in the future making more of the reels, because those are easier to make. But if you want more long-form content from me, then just comment below and I will see what I can do about it. Also about the filming setup, if you're curious, I am using my phone camera. I'm hoping that I might get to buy maybe some lighting or something to make the lighting more even, because I know the lighting quality in the video shifted quite a lot, but that is something for me to think about in the future. But anyway, thank you for watching and hope you're having a good day wherever you are.